They handcuffed him in front of everyone, in broad daylight. No warning, no explanation, no mercy. 1 minute. Daniel Harper was arranging books outside his quiet little bookstore, and the next, flashing red and blue lights turned his peaceful life into a public nightmare. Imagine this. You're standing at your workplace. Neighbors you've known for years are watching. Phones are recording. Whispers are spreading. And suddenly someone says, "You're under arrest for a crime you didn't commit." Daniel didn't shout. He didn't fight. He didn't run. He just stood there, confused, humiliated, powerless, as cold metal cuffs closed around his wrists. The same people who once smiled at him now stepped back in fear. I always thought he was strange. You never really know someone. But here's the terrifying part. The police were sure. A witness identified him. The case looked solid. The town had already judged him guilty. And Daniel? He had nothing but the truth. Sitting alone in a gray interrogation room, accused of robbing a bank. He kept repeating the same words. There's been a mistake. But no one was listening. Or were they? Because what happened minutes later inside, that police station would shock the entire town. A single detail. One overlooked clue. A tiny piece of evidence that would flip the entire case upside down. And when the truth finally came out, the same officers who arrested him, the same department that humiliated him, would be forced to do something no one expected. They would beg for forgiveness. But the real question is, when your reputation is destroyed in seconds, when the whole town doubts you, when your name is dragged through the mud, is an apology enough? Tonight's story isn't just about a wrongful arrest. It's about judgment. It's about assumptions. It's about how fast society decides who you are. And it will make you question something very important. If this happened to you, would anyone believe your innocence? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear proves that sometimes the quietest person in the room is hiding the loudest truth. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the peaceful afternoon like a blade. Maple Grove was the kind of town where nothing ever happened. Children rode their bikes without worry. Neighbors left their doors unlocked. The loudest sound most days was the bell above the entrance of Harper's, books ringing as customers stepped in and out. And right there, standing outside that very bookstore, was Daniel Harper. Daniel wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't even particularly social. He was just quiet, the kind of man people noticed, but didn't really know. He kept himself, spoke politely, and followed the same routine every single day. That afternoon, he was stacking a small display of discounted novels near the entrance. The autumn breeze rustled the pages as he worked carefully, adjusting each book so it stood perfectly straight. Then came the Sirens. At first, Daniel barely looked up. Emergency vehicles occasionally passed through town on their way to the highway, but the sound grew louder, closer, too close. Within seconds, 2 police cars sped down the street and stopped abruptly in front of the bookstore. Tires screeched. Doors flew open. The street fell silent. Pedestrians froze mid-step. A woman pushing a stroller stopped completely. An elderly man across the street lowered his newspaper. Every eye turned toward the flashing lights. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions serious and focused. They scanned the area before locking their eyes onto Daniel. "Daniel Harper?" One of them called out firmly. Daniel straightened up slowly, confused. "Yes," he answered, brushing dust from his hands. The officers approached with determined strides. "Sir, we need you to come with us." Daniel blinked. "Is something wrong?" "You're under arrest." The word seemed to hang in the air like a thunderclap. Gasps spread through the small crowd. Someone whispered, "Arrest?" Daniel's face drained of color. "Under arrest? For what?" The officer didn't hesitate. "You know exactly what this is about." I don't," Daniel replied honestly. His voice was calm but trembling at the edges. Before he could say anything more, one officer turned around and pulled his hands behind his back. The cold metal of handcuffs clicked into place. The sound echoed louder than the sirens had. A teenager across the street quickly pulled out his phone and started recording. A woman muttered, "I always thought he was strange." Another voice whispered, "He barely talks to anyone." Daniel looked around at the familiar faces. Faces he had greeted for years. Some looked shocked. Others looked suspicious. A few looked almost satisfied, as if a mystery had finally been solved. "I think there's been a mistake," Daniel said quietly. But the officers weren't listening. They guided him toward the patrol car. His shoes scraped lightly against the pavement. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had someone accused him of something? Was this about unpaid taxes? A misunderstanding? He searched his memory desperately, but found nothing. As the car door opened, Daniel hesitated for a split second, not to resist, but because stepping inside felt like stepping into another life. The officer placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Get in." Daniel obeyed. The door shut, and just like that, the quiet man from the bookstore was no longer just Daniel. He was a suspect. The patrol car pulled away slowly, sirens off now, leaving behind a wave of whispers. "Did you hear about the bank robbery?" They said the suspect was about his height. "I can't believe it." Inside the car, Daniel stared at the metal grate separating him from the front seats. His reflection stared back faintly from the window, pale, confused, frightened. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to breathe steadily. This has to be a mistake, he thought. At the police station, the atmosphere felt cold and mechanical. The warmth of Maple Grove disappeared behind concrete walls and fluorescent lights. Daniel was escorted through a series of doors that buzzed loudly as they opened and shut behind him. Each buzz sounded final. He was placed in a small interrogation room with gray walls and a single metal table bolted to the floor. A camera blinked red in the corner. The officers removed his handcuffs, but gestured for him to sit. A thick file was dropped onto the table. "Daniel Harper," the lead officer began, flipping it open. "You were seen near Riverside Bank at approximately 9:42 p.m. last night." Daniel frowned immediately. "Riverside Bank? I wasn't near any bank." "That's interesting," the officer replied flatly, "because that's exactly when the bank was robbed." The words hit Daniel like a punch. "Robbed," he repeated. "There must be some confusion. I was home last night." "A witness positively identified you," the second officer added. Daniel's stomach tightened. "That's impossible." The officer leaned forward. "Are you saying the witness is lying?" "I'm saying they're mistaken." The room felt smaller by the second. Daniel tried to recall his evening clearly. He had closed the bookstore at 6. Went home, heated leftover soup, sat in his armchair reading until nearly 11. Nothing unusual. Nothing criminal. "I don't even own a hoodie," Daniel added suddenly, remembering news reports about a masked suspect. The officers exchanged glances. "You expect us to believe you were just reading?" one asked skeptically. "Yes." The simplicity of his answer seemed almost suspicious to them. The questioning continued for hours. "Where were you exactly? Did anyone see you? Can anyone confirm your story?" Daniel answered everything honestly, though doubt began creeping into his own thoughts. Not doubt about his innocence, but doubt about whether anyone would believe him. He wasn't popular. He didn't have close friends. No family in town. Just a quiet life. At one point, Daniel leaned back and closed his eyes briefly. "Please check the cameras near my apartment building," he said softly. "They'll show I was there." The lead officer tapped his pen against the table. "We'll see," he said, but his tone suggested he had already made up his mind. Outside the interrogation room, paperwork was being processed. Charges were being prepared. The assumption of guilt had already begun settling in. Back in town, the story was spreading fast. Daniel Harper arrested for bank robbery. The quiet man, the bookstore clerk, the one no one really knew. As the hours dragged on, Daniel sat alone in that gray room, listening to the faint hum of fluorescent lights above him. He had done nothing wrong. Yet somehow his entire life was unraveling, and he had no idea that this nightmare was only just beginning. While Daniel sat alone in the interrogation room, staring at the blank gray wall in front of him, something unexpected was happening elsewhere in the station. Not everyone was convinced. Officer Sarah Mitchell had been quiet since the arrest. She had stood beside the others, followed protocol, and said little, but inside, doubt had been growing steadily. It started the moment Daniel didn't resist. Most suspects panic. Some argue. Others get defensive. Daniel had done none of that. He had simply looked confused, genuinely confused. Now, hours later, Mitchell stood in front of a computer screen, reviewing the case file once more. Riverside bank robbery, 9:42 p.m. Suspect, male mid-30s, average height, dark clothing. Witness identification. Looks like Daniel Harper. Looks like... Mitchell murmured under her breath. She clicked open the surveillance footage again. The video played in grainy black and white. A man wearing a dark hoodie entered the bank. His face was partially hidden. He moved quickly toward the counter. Within minutes, he fled. Mitchell leaned closer to the screen. Pause it there. The technician froze the frame as the suspect turned slightly toward the camera. The image was blurry, but something caught her eye. Zoom in on the neck area. The technician adjusted the frame. Pixels sharpened slightly. There it was, a dark mark on the right side of the suspect's neck. That looks like a tattoo, Mitchell said. She thought back to the arrest outside the bookstore. Daniel had been wearing a simple button-down shirt. When the officers turned him around to cuff him, she had clearly seen his neck. It had been completely clean. No tattoo, she whispered. Her heart began to beat faster. Run it back, she said. The footage played again. This time she focused on the suspect's movement as he exited the bank. Step, step, drag. She narrowed her eyes. Did you see that? The technician squinted. See what? He's limping on his right leg. They replayed the clip 3 times. Each time it was clearer. The suspect had a slight but noticeable limp. Mitchell's mind flashed back to Daniel being escorted to patrol car. She remembered how steady his walk had been. Calm, balanced, no limp. She stepped back from the screen. Why wasn't this mentioned in the report? She asked. The technician shrugged. Witness said he was nervous and moving fast. Maybe they didn't notice. Mitchell folded her arms, thinking hard. Something wasn't right. She grabbed Daniel's arrest report and flipped through the notes. The identification had come from a single witness, a bank customer who claimed the suspect looked like the quiet bookstore guy. Looked like? That wasn't certainty. That was assumption. Mitchell exhaled slowly. They had arrested a man based on resemblance and urgency, and now the evidence was starting to tell a different story. Without wasting another second, she headed toward the interrogation room. Inside, Daniel was sitting exactly as she had left him, hands folded, shoulders slightly slumped, eyes tired but calm. She entered quickly. Mr. Harper, I need to ask you something, she said. Daniel looked up, surprised by her tone. It wasn't aggressive anymore. It sounded uncertain. Do you have any tattoos? She asked directly. Daniel blinked. No. Anywhere? Neck, arms, back. No, he repeated. I've never had one. Mitchell stepped closer and carefully checked his neck herself. Nothing, not even a faint mark. She felt a heavy weight settle in her chest. When you were arrested, she continued, did you have any injuries? Any issues walking? Daniel frowned. No, I'm fine. Why? Mitchell didn't answer. She simply nodded and stepped out of the room again. Now her doubts were turning into concern. She walked straight into her supervisor's office. Chief, we need to review the footage again, she said firmly. The chief looked up, slightly irritated. We already have a positive ID. With respect, sir, the suspect in the footage has a neck tattoo and a limp. Harper has neither. The room went quiet. The chief leaned back slowly. Are you certain? Yes. He hesitated. Bring it up, he ordered. Minutes later, the footage played on the larger screen in the briefing room. Mitchell pointed at the suspect's neck. Right there. Freeze it. The image paused. Even the chief leaned forward. That does look like a tattoo, he admitted. And watch this, Mitchell continued as the video resumed. Focus on his right leg. Step, step, drag. The limp was undeniable now. The chief's jaw tightened. Check Harper's alibi, he said quickly. Mitchell had already anticipated that. She rushed to the traffic and security camera system that monitored nearby apartment buildings. Daniel had mentioned cameras near his home. After searching through timestamps, she found footage from 9:38 p.m. A familiar figure appeared on the screen. Daniel, He was walking calmly toward his apartment building, carrying what looked like a grocery bag. "Pause it," she said. The timestamp was clear. 9:38 p.m. The robbery had occurred at 9:42 p.m. Riverside Bank was nearly 15 minutes away by car. There was no way Daniel could have been in both places. Mitchell felt a wave of shock. "We made a mistake," she whispered. The chief stared at the screen, silent. The room felt heavier than before. All the confidence from earlier in the day had disappeared. In its place was something far more uncomfortable: realization. "How did this get past U.S.?" the chief muttered. Mitchell didn't respond. They had rushed. The pressure to solve the robbery quickly, the fear spreading in the town, the convenience of a witness pointing to someone familiar. It had been easier to believe the first answer than to question it. But now the truth was staring at them from the screen. Daniel Harper was innocent, and they had arrested him publicly, humiliated him in front of his neighbors, interrogated him for hours. Mitchell swallowed hard. "We need to release him immediately," she said. The chief nodded slowly, his earlier authority replaced with reluctant humility. "Prepare the paperwork," he said quietly. As Mitchell walked back toward the interrogation room, her steps felt heavier than before. She wasn't just carrying evidence. She was carrying guilt. Inside the gray room, Daniel sat waiting, unaware that everything was about to change. Outside, officers scrambled to correct their mistake. But one truth remained undeniable. Justice had almost failed an innocent man, and it had taken one careful look, one willingness to question, to stop it from going too far. The sound of the lock turning echoed loudly inside the small gray interrogation room. Daniel slowly lifted his head. He had lost track of time. The fluorescent lights above him never dimmed. The air felt heavy. Every passing minute had stretched like an hour. When the door finally opened, he expected more questions. Instead, he saw something different. The chief walked in first, followed by Officer Mitchell. But their expressions were no longer firm and commanding. They looked uneasy, almost humbled. "Mr. Harper," the chief began, clearing his throat, "we need to speak with you." Daniel straightened in his chair. His eyes were tired but calm. "Am I being charged?" he asked quietly. The chief hesitated. "No." The single word hung in the air. Daniel blinked, trying to process it. "There's been a development in the case," Officer Mitchell added gently. "New evidence confirms you were not involved in the robbery." Silence filled the room. Daniel stared at them, waiting for more. "You're free to go," the chief said. For a moment, Daniel didn't move. He had spent hours defending himself, repeating the same truth over and over. And now, suddenly it was over? "Free," he repeated softly. "Yes," Mitchell said. "We verified your alibi through security footage. You were at your apartment at the time of the robbery." Daniel exhaled slowly. It wasn't relief that showed on his face first. It was exhaustion. The chief stepped forward. "Mr. Harper," he said, his voice no longer authoritative but human, "we owe you an apology." Daniel looked at him directly for the first time. The chief continued, "We acted too quickly. We relied too heavily on a single witness identification. We should have examined the surveillance footage more carefully before making an arrest." The room felt smaller, not because of tension, but because of the weight of those words. Daniel stood slowly from his chair. "What about what happened outside?" he asked quietly. "In front of everyone?" Neither officer interrupted him. "You arrested me at my workplace. My neighbors saw. My customers saw." Daniel continued. His tone wasn't angry. It was steady, controlled. "People were recording." Mitchell swallowed. "We understand," she said, "and we are prepared to make a public statement immediately clearing your name." The chief nodded. "We will explain that it was a case of mistaken identity and take full responsibility." Daniel studied their faces. He could see the sincerity there, the regret, but sincerity did not erase what had happened. "When people believe something," Daniel said softly, "it's hard to undo." His words weren't accusatory. They were honest. The chief lowered his gaze briefly. "You're right," he admitted. A few minutes later, Daniel stepped out of the police station, no longer in handcuffs, no longer suspect. The evening air felt different than it had that morning. Cooler, heavier. Officer Mitchell walked beside him. "I'm truly sorry," she said quietly. "I should have questioned the evidence sooner." Daniel gave a small nod. "You did question it." She paused. "Yes, but not soon enough." Outside the station, a few local reporters had already gathered. News of the wrongful arrest had begun to spread almost as quickly as the arrest itself. Cameras turned toward Daniel. "Mr. Harper, do you have a comment?" He hesitated for only a moment. "I was innocent," he said calmly, "and I'm grateful the truth was found." He didn't attack the department. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand justice. That made his words even more powerful. The police chief stepped forward next. "Today, we made an error," he announced publicly. Daniel Harper was wrongfully arrested due to incomplete evaluation of the evidence. "We sincerely apologize for the distress this has caused him." Hearing those words spoken publicly mattered, but the real test would be back in Maple Grove. When Daniel returned to the bookstore the next morning, he felt the weight of eyes on him. The bell above the door rang as he unlocked it. Within minutes, the first customer entered, Mrs. Langford, who lived 3 houses down from him. She hesitated near the counter before speaking. "Daniel," she said softly, "I'm sorry for believing what I heard." Daniel offered a small smile. "It's all right." But it wasn't just her. Over the next few days, several townspeople came by, not just to buy books, but to apologize. "I shouldn't have assumed. I didn't know what to think. I'm glad the truth came out." Daniel accepted each apology with quiet grace. Yet at night, when he sat alone in his apartment, the memory replayed in his mind. The sirens, the handcuffs, the whispers. Trust, once shaken, doesn't fully return overnight. Meanwhile, inside the police department, changes were happening. New procedures were introduced. Arrests would now require multiple verified pieces of evidence. Surveillance footage would be reviewed in detail before any public action. Witness identifications would need stronger confirmation. The chief addressed his officers directly. "We cannot afford to let urgency replace accuracy," he said firmly. "A person's reputation is not something we gamble with." Officer Mitchell carried the lesson deeply. She requested additional training in evidence analysis and later became known for her careful, methodical approach to investigations. Weeks later, the real suspect was captured in a neighboring town. When his mugshot was released, the difference was obvious. A bold tattoo ran along the right side of his neck, and records showed he had a prior injury causing a limp. The town reacted with a mixture of relief and shame. Relief that the real criminal was caught. Shame that they had been so quick to judge someone they had known for years. One evening, as Daniel locked up the bookstore, he noticed the same teenager who had recorded his arrest walking toward him. The boy looked embarrassed. "I deleted the video," he said awkwardly. Daniel looked at him, surprised. "You didn't have to tell me that," Daniel replied. "I just didn't want that to be what people remember," the boy said. Daniel nodded slowly. "That's kind of you." As time passed, life in Maple Grove began to feel normal again. But something had shifted. People were slower to gossip, quicker to ask questions, more careful with assumptions. Daniel continued his routine: morning coffee, quiet work days, evening walks. But he walked with a deeper awareness now. He had experienced how fragile reputation could be, how quickly doubt could spread, and how powerful accountability could be when mistakes were admitted. The flashing lights that once symbolized humiliation had ultimately led to something unexpected: growth for the police department, for the town, and even for Daniel himself. Because sometimes justice is not just about catching the guilty, it's about protecting the innocent. And in Maple Grove, that lesson would never be forgotten.